Hello, welcome to the lecture for the first part of Chapter 2. This chapter is on domestic crime, transnational crime, and justice, and it provides a bit of an overview of some of the disciplinary areas within comparative criminal justice systems and comparative criminology. Those are two areas that are sometimes confused. I'm going to spend a few moments just distinguishing between the two. The class is comparative criminal justice systems, but it's important to understand how that differs from comparative criminology. As you'll see on this slide, comparative criminology focuses on the study of crime in two or more countries. Sometimes when a comparative criminologist is going about his or her duties and looking at this area, they are focusing on crime as a social phenomenon. When they do that, the focus of their concern is more on the crime itself. We'll see some examples of that a little bit later. At other times, the interest is on crime as social behavior. When this happens, the focus is more on the offender. We won't be seeing so much of an example of that because that really is a more traditional criminology kind of class. You'll also see that comparative criminal justice, the focus here is on how two or more countries maintain social order and accomplish justice. And that's pretty much the focus of this entire semester and the focus of the textbook, of course, as well. And because of that, in this particular chapter, we won't be spending very much time on that aspect of comparative criminal justice. Now, as it says on the PowerPoint slide, that's chapters 3 through 10 here. So we're going to look more closely at comparative criminology at this point. And in doing so, we start with that first one, crime as a social phenomenon. Now here, it's interesting to compare, if you happen to have your textbook handy, take a look at page 28, and you'll see the crime rate across countries. It's awfully intriguing to want to do that, and very tempting, but it has to be done with caution. As you see in figure 2.1 on page 28, taking just a few of the countries around the world and comparing them on the United Nations Survey of Crime, you'll see that persons brought into formal contact with the police for all crimes per 100,000 population. Finland has the highest amongst the countries listed here anyway of the rate per 100,000 population, and Kenya has the lowest. Now there are, of course, a variety of problems with that, and again, as you can see on the slide, we need to know first of all what are the differences in legal definitions. Your textbook uses rape as an example, and that particular crime can be defined in a variety of ways, and depending upon how the countries that you're comparing have chosen to define rape, you may or may not be able to reasonably compare those countries. Also, the accuracy of the crime reporting, that is how are different countries going about reporting their crime, and this is going to vary by a variety of things. The example given on the slide, how widely available is insurance coverage? Obviously, if you happen to be living in a country where insurance coverage is not very widespread, when somebody loses a personal item, bicycle, car, burglary items, whatever it might be, the motivation oftentimes to report that to the police is whether or not you have it covered by insurance. In fact, in some countries, or some insurance companies anyway, you can't get a reimbursement for the loss unless you show a reporting to the police. But if you happen to live in a country where your bicycle is not covered by insurance and you choose not to even report to the police that your bicycle was stolen because you don't see any benefit to it since you're not going to get insurance coverage, then we would expect those kinds of reports for personal property in this example to be very, very low. The accuracy of the crime recording is another problem. Here we have everything from politics and corruption entering the picture to, just as again it says in the slide, the importance of the particular item that has been lost. In some countries, bicycles are very important, and to that extent you might expect in those countries the reporting, or recording I should say, of well, actually both reporting and recording, of bicycle thefts to be quite high. The Netherlands comes to mind, for example, a place where bicycles are widespread. Seemingly most everyone has one. They seem to be more common even than automobiles, for example. And because of that, when a bicycle is reported as having been stolen, the police are much more likely, given the importance of bicycles in that society, to record that crime. On the other hand, corruption, as I mentioned, can also play a role. Because crime statistics can be used by politicians, for example, to show success or failure in an agency doing its job. If you are running for office and you are in the United States, for example, a county sheriff or a candidate for county sheriff, you might try to identify statistics that don't reflect very positively on the incumbent, the person who is currently the sheriff. On the other hand, if you are the incumbent sheriff running for re-election, you'll want to identify how crime has decreased during your time period in office. And so you will identify crime or statistics that will show that. The problem with corruption comes in if you manipulate those statistics. So if the crime recording people in the sheriff's department have been told, for example, to not bother reporting or recording, I should say, crimes that are reported under a certain value, or maybe not recording any auto thefts or bicycle thefts or whatever it might be. In this manner, it is corrupt because obviously you are manipulating the statistics, and you're doing so for political reasons, and you're trying to show that crime during your time period has gone down, or at least hasn't gone up, and this would be a misuse, obviously, of crime recording. The problem in terms of comparing countries comes in because in those countries where corruption might be higher, it's possible that if we try to compare the crime rates of 2 or 3 or 4 different countries, and a couple of those countries are very corrupt, and we don't have reason to believe that their recording practices are particularly good, then it wouldn't be fair to compare the crime rates in those countries with the crime rates in other countries where we have reason to believe that the recording practices are much more honest. So you can see that when we're working in comparative criminology, it's very important when looking at crime as a social phenomenon to take into consideration things like the legal definitions, the accuracy of the reporting, and the accuracy of the recording of crime when trying to compare countries on different levels. Despite those problems and the differences in definitions and reporting and recording problems, it is, however, possible to still compare the countries. And it's important to keep this in mind because you'll see during this semester, and maybe on your own research as well, several opportunities to compare countries across different kinds of statistics. We know, for example, that comparison of homicide statistics is fairly accurate. Homicide is one of the more accurately kept statistics in countries all around the world. It's not as easy to fail to report or fail to record a homicide. It's possible, but not as easily to avoid doing that. And for those reasons, if you were to compare countries on the basis of homicide rates, many would believe that you have a more accurate basis of comparison than you might with some other type of crime. But as we're doing this, again returning to the slide here, it's important to have countries with similar definitions on the crimes that you're comparing and similar recording and reporting practices, so that if you are to compare countries and you have confidence that the way that these countries report, record, and define a particular crime, or at least the crimes you're looking at, then you would have a stronger basis for making your comparison and having other people have some faith in your comparisons. Even when that's not possible to have countries with similar definitions, etc., it's still possible to compare over time to get an idea of the country's similarities and differences. And this is an example that you see on page 29 using figure 2.2. And that takes a look at robbery rates per 100,000 population in, 6 different countries it looks like. And so even if we didn't have much confidence, for example, that the definitions, recording, and reporting practices of England and Wales were very similar to those in Turkey, for example, this is still an interesting and important chart because we can look at over time how the rates in Turkey for robbery have decreased down to from 2003, 2004, an increase in 2006, and so on. And compare that with Poland, for example, where there was a very steady decrease in the statistics kept in Poland from 2003 to 2006 and 7. And so those kinds of trends become very interesting to comparative criminologists, as they aren't so much interested in comparing directly Poland and Turkey robbery statistics as they are looking at the trends. What was happening during this time period when robbery rates were apparently declining in Poland, and in other countries that might have been increasing. So the point is, again, returning to the slide, comparison of countries is possible as long as it's done with caution. Crime data can and should be compared cross-nationally, and you will see us doing that in this semester and in some other textbooks, or not books, but resources that you'll be using as well. Well, the other area that comparative criminologists look at is crime as social behavior. And as mentioned earlier, this is done more typically in looking at what some of the causes and the origins of crime might be. How is it distributed across a country or society? The textbook on pages 32 to 33 gives some examples of some of the grand theories, as they are called, that can be looked at. We won't go into great depth on these, since, as I mentioned, this would be more typical for a comparative criminology class than it is for ours. But just looking at the four that are mentioned there, modernization theories, for example, these kind of theories would try to explain crime across countries on the basis of the social processes that might accompany things like the Industrial Revolution. What kind of social conditions are conducive to crime or result in increased criminality? And the modernization theories look at things like industrial development as being an influence on those social conditions, and helping to explain how crime might occur and change over time in countries as they become more modern. The civilization theories take a look at the historical link between crime and civility, and when they are being used, when the civilizations theories are being used, the idea, for example, is that violent crime is decreased as civility is increased in a society. Violent societies become more peaceful, more modern as civilization develops and civility occurs. The world system theory relies upon capitalism, say, as an explanatory variable, arguing that as capitalism expands, it disrupts the indigenous culture and the traditional means of subsistence, I should say, and the result is some inequity between class and conflict between those classes or among those classes. And basically, again, as the slide says, expansion of capitalism encourages crime. The opportunity theories are based upon the idea that crime is the result of modern economies and social organizations that are providing increased opportunities to engage in criminal behavior. As more and more opportunities present themselves for economic crimes, for example, there are more people who have the opportunity to commit fraud, embezzlement, other types of things. As opportunities increase for social interaction, you might have more possibilities for violent crime as people are out and about more and as they are able to be more mobile in their society. Those are very much of just a broad overview, and again, this is not something that this particular class is spending much time on. It's again more appropriate for comparative criminology, but I wanted you to have at least kind of an overview of the types of things that comparative criminologists will do as they look at crime across countries, across cultures. Comparative criminology has also looked at domestic crime in a variety of countries, and in doing so They would, as the example I gave earlier, comparing homicide rates in two different countries. However, increasingly important is the idea of transnational crime and how comparative criminologists might help us better understand the transnational crimes that are occurring today. And the remainder of this chapter looks at those types of crimes as from a comparative criminology perspective. We will, in the next PowerPoint presentation from Chapter 2, we will continue to look at those transnational crimes from this perspective, but that will do it for this particular section of Chapter 2. Thanks for your attention. Goodbye.